Welcome, Cindy. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's an honor to be here, Carrie. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am so glad. And so I'd love to start today by talking about your book, Under the Orange Blossoms, an inspirational story of bravery and strength. Can you talk to us about what led you to write the book?
Well, it was actually a slight accident in a sense that I was really trying to write a cookbook. My daughter and I are an event planner, and I was trying to think of great tips for entertaining, economical, how to make table settings more beautiful, and cook a dinner, tips to make dinner just seamlessly flawless, and also beautiful landscape, tablescapes, that type of thing. Uh, I'm also a avid, I love to cook. And so I've been collecting recipes pretty much since as long as I can think about, because I could look back in my recipe books and I have it in my original handwriting, as a child, maybe, I don't know, six. I think my first few recipes were things like Jello, uh, the, uh,
I love it.
Jello, that was a big one, Jello, and, adding fruit in my Jello, and just thinking that was the most mind-blowing experience ever. So I wrote that down, and there was a recipe on Mrs. Anderson, who is our neighbor, Mrs. Anderson's grilled cheese sandwich, and I used to go to her house. She was my best friend's mother, and she would take care of me often, make a grilled cheese sandwich, and I would have a 7 Up, and I just thought that was the most comforting thing anyone could do to me when I was feeling ill, or that was her love language. So I wrote down that recipe, but as I was going through my recipes and, especially from a split culture, German and Mexican, I thought, "I have lots of recipes to offer here." So when I was doing that, they were actually memories for me, and I would reflect back and go, "Oh, I know when I wrote this recipe, or I know when I experienced this." And everybody has different experiences where they look through a photo album,
Right.
and you could reflect back. My recipes are my photo album. So are my shoes. Those are the places that I've walked in where I could kind of go, "Oh, I bought this on this vacation." But my
Gotcha.
recipes are my photo album. And when I was writing these recipes down, I was getting kind of maybe triggered, or would recall a memory. And in that memory, I would think, and a lot of them were positive, but a lot of them were more negative, where I recognized, like, "Oh, I know what happened to me at age 5. That was the time I was sexually first." That was the first time my father came into my room. So I remember writing down that, like taking, separating that recipe, but thinking like, "Well, what am I going to do now with this toxic memory?" So I'd write that memory down in another notepad and write that memory down, but then I would think of, like, "Okay, what was the alternative thing? How did I get through that?" And then I'd write the positive thing down in a notepad and go, "Oh, that was the solution to that," or that this maybe exercising or running, or this mantra, or this beautiful inspirational quote got me through that time. So as I was filling up my recipe book, I was also filling up other books, notepads, I should say, on inspirational quotes, mantras, healing tools, obviously decor, and I had 5 books in front of me, notepads in front of me
Wow.
by the time I was done, and I looked at it and I thought, "Oh, yay, I've got my recipe book done. This is fabulous. What a great idea, all these entertainment." And this is who I am today. This is what I represent right now. But I did take my hands over it, and I was just kind of rubbing my hands over the books, or putting my hand on top of the book, and I would think, "Okay, which one fills me with the most satisfaction?" Of course, my recipes, and then the other one was my inspirational quotes, and then these healing tools. And I thought, "Ooh, that's a little bit heavier." And the one that carried the most energy was the one about my sexual abuse and just the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. And I thought, okay, this is absolutely the book I will never talk about. Like, I could never share this in my life. And as I was sitting there thinking, well, why would I do that? This probably has the most value in it. I don't know if people really need to know my cookbook tips. And I don't know if they really need to know that, little uh, nuances of having a party. I thought, I know it's fun. I know this is really entertaining, but it's probably those tools of survival and the ones of trauma. And I thought, I've had so much in my life. It would be a shame to take the easier road. And I picked the harder road. So I started writing about my trauma in my childhood, and then also how this affected me in my teen years, and then also how it affected me in my parenting and also in my adulthood. So that was how Under the Orange Blossoms was created. And the orange blossoms represents a sanctuary. So I lived in rural Arizona, and I'd run away as often as I could. And I'd run to the orange orchards, and in there, I found a lot of sanctuary in the middle of the orchards because it was a safe place. And I used nature, and I looked at nature as a way of healing and kind of looked at those trees as my parents because those trees did not hit me. Those trees did not yell at me. They were just always there no matter what.
They
And so I
sheltered you.
they sheltered me, and I think I found a lot more. I recognized that I had, the world was a bigger place, and there was something greater than me in that place.
Yeah. Wow. So I absolutely love how you got to that book. It's funny how your subconscious gets you to where you need to be. And as you said, I am sure that the cookbook and entertainment tips and all of that are wonderful. But I tend to agree with you that the story of your trauma, because other people experience similar trauma,
Mhm.
is really important to talk about. Um, not just for the people reading it, but also for your own healing. Did you feel like it was helpful in your healing to write that book?
No, I did not. In fact,
Okay.
it absolutely the opposite. I was so traumatized. I was so traumatized by writing it. Um, it was horrific. I used to put the book down or my computer, sometimes I would toss it on the floor angrily, and I'm thinking, "Why am I doing this? Why am I digging back into my past?" And I was getting triggered, I was having nightmares, I was going through everything that I felt that I had unfolded and put neatly in a place, in different perfect little boxes in my mind, I guess you could say, and I was reopening those boxes that I thought I had done a lot of therapy on. And it's different when you go to a therapist, like or if you do like conventional therapy or unconventional therapy. When you're doing a format of therapy, it's like you're like, "Ah, okay," and that's you personally saying, "Ah, I've reached the spot and this feels good. I think I'm done now." But when you're writing and you're writing in description, what did the room look like? Where was the feeling coming from? Was it in your stomach? What did you feel in your body? What was the response of other people and how did they feel? What did they look like? It becomes something that you relive, and I don't know if that's truly a healthy experience, but I kept on doing it because I would sit there and meditate and think, okay, this is not about me. This is about helping somebody else. How do we relate to somebody else? And I really do believe that a lot of times we relate to other people through storytelling. Our
Mhm.
moms, our aunts, friends, girlfriends, we tell stories. We're great at telling stories, "You
Right,
know what? Know what happened?" That kind of a thing. And I thought, well, that's how I learn often. And if I want a professional or an expert, then I'll go and I'll resource and find resources to find that expert opinion. But often it's the storytelling that ignites the spark where I kind of go, huh, okay, I don't relate to that story, but I did relate to this portion. And that's very hopeful, or that I could apply to. And
right,
so that was the thing that I kept on thinking about. How many times did I feel trapped? How many times did I feel stuck? How many times did I feel hope, like no hope out there, or isolated, alone, enraged, all the emotions that come through that. And I thought, if I could change 10 lives through this and change the generational trauma, this trauma loop that we sometimes get stuck in,
mm,
if I could help and aid in that, and just 10 people, I always think about like all the other lives that they affect, and they can
right,
change too by that
right.
process.
Yeah, it's that trickle down effect, right?
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so you mentioned earlier about how the abuse affected you as a teen, as a parent, as an adult. Um, Talk to us a little bit about those different segments of your life and how your abuse impacted those.
So my dad is my abuser. He's my sexual predator. And people look at sexual abuse in, oh, it's penetration. That's what everybody thinks. Oh, it's penetration. Um, Not necessarily. Sexual abuse could be fondling. It
Hmm.
could be just a variety of different things. And I'm sure you could use your imagination with that. But nobody really thinks about, I mean, I did have fondling, but my dad's biggest format was pornography. And and then and I don't know what he used these pictures for. I don't know if that was given to other people or if it was just for his personal satisfaction. But he would wake me up often in the middle of the night, and he started to become very elaborate with his pictures, with his equipment, wake me up and have me pose and do different things. And I felt that that was, in some ways, as a young child, this happened from 5 to 10. I felt that that was compared to the fondling where I would dissociate, and, I hated it, but I didn't know how to say no, and I was threatened that if I didn't do that, then he would hurt my mother or my sister, and for me, they were the most precious things on the earth, so that scared me, that in fact,
Right.
I really believed him that I would die, and, I would not be around if I shared any of these things. So he, would take pictures of me, and, eventually, as I was getting older, I started to become I started kind of becoming passive aggressive, I guess you could say. And in that, it became more of a physical abuse. And then later on, it became, as I was getting older and I responded to emotional abuse, then that became emotional abuse. And so within this time frame, it really affected my development. And by the time I was 10, I was fully developed because I was overstimulated sexually. I completely blossomed into an adult, and my dad was not attracted to um, adults. He was attracted to children. And so that's why it was such an abrupt ending. And then later on through the years, I realized that he had done this to also neighborhood children too. And I believe it was fondling with them too. So like a real pedophile.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting, like, later on, I had to figure out, how do you have Christmas with a pedophile? If one person denies it, that this has happened in their family, and it's my word against his word, nobody else has seen this, then how do I carry on my life? And so this is the dynamics that I talk about, a lot of boundary setting that I had to put up for myself and for my children later on in life, and
Mhm.
why I parented a certain way, also why I had certain relationships. I just a lot of times just let them know if it was somebody I was serious. I'm like, this is my history. My dad's a weirdo. But he is in my life and this is the scenario. And I mean, that is an odd thing. I mean, yes, most people are going to run. And when they ran, I was like, okay, this person is probably not the right person for me. But I had to be very straight up and very honest with myself and with other people, and if it was something that they weren't comfortable with or it wasn't their style of communication, then usually it wasn't a friendship, and, it's unfortunate, but that's the way it was, and I think it just became who I am. And so the book kind of takes me, or takes the reader through the process of what it was like to be a teenager. In my teenage years, I was so self loathing and disgusted because I dissociated what happened in my childhood, that it all came back as a teenager when I became sexually active for the first time. And it came back in dreams, which is very, very, very typical, something that I didn't know when we have trauma of any sort, but typically in sexual abuse, it'll come back in some other format. And usually for sexual abuse, it comes back in parenting. But for me, it came back with being sexually active as a teenager through the process of dreams. And that's where I would start to journal. And I was able to recreate, kind of like it felt like a broken glass or a broken mirror, where you take the mirror and you start to put all the pieces together. And in my journal, I could put the whole thing together. I confronted my father afterwards and my mother, who lived in complete denial. And I have to say, my family, they're a very well educated family. Um, they're very open, but this was just something that they both did not address, and I didn't feel protected on. And this was a lot of the betrayal and the issues that stemmed out from my childhood that led me into adulthood, with um, where you get your boundaries broken, where my boundaries I had to establish, and where I had betrayal and trust issues.
Right, right. So, so your mom, are your parents still living?
Mm. So I finished. Okay, interesting enough. To answer your question, no, they're not. They've passed. My mom died when I was young, and my dad, out of all of this, he made me his POA. So when he was elderly, he didn't have anybody else to take care of him. So I was there, going from state to state. He was in California, I was in Washington at that time. And I moved him up to Washington, 5 minutes away from me. So, because I have a special needs son, and I thought, this is like too much for me to deal with. So I moved him up for my convenience so that I could help him with his medical issues, because I was more concerned about my son, who was special needs, and he was going through those horrible teen years. And I was like,
Sure.
okay, I need to focus on him. I'll just have my dad closer to me. And in this process, my dad finally started talking about what had happened through the past, because it was denial. And in this, I said, Dad, I think we should talk about this. I think, and he agreed. And I said, I think I want to write a book about this. And he goes, well, then let's do this. How can I help you? So I started to record him, and it was
Wow.
the mindset of a pedophile, and what he thought and why he did this and how he justified his actions. So the book is a lot more detailed than just someone's story. It's also
Right.
kind of creates a whole loop in the cycle. And now it has the generations from being a child, a teenager, then it has adult years, and now I'm going to be a grandma. So it has the full cycle of that. And I buried my mother and my father. So I can relate to all the different stages
Mhm.
of this journey where you have dark secrets in your family and what stays behind closed doors, or what happens in this household, my mother used to say, remains in this household, and what the damages that can do.
Right.
And a lot of this, my book has a lot of self-healing tools that I had to find on my own because I lived in a foreign country at that time in Spain, and I really contemplated committing suicide. Um, and what was the thing that was going to keep me there? So those were the healing, that was the healing onset of a healing journey up until now, because it's constantly evolving, and I never really thought that it would take me a lifetime, but I think once you go through a healing stage, we always in some ways look for more improvement, or it becomes an interest and we start digging deeper, and then
Right.
before you know it, we become something. We heal from the past as much as we can. And yes, we do carry those scars, but it becomes a journey onward to other um, forms of greaterness, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
because I look
So
at myself now.
growth.
Yeah, growth. Thank you. It's
Yeah.
a process of evolution. And I look at myself now and I go, I am a different person. And no, it's not perfect. And I do have my scars. Um, but I have changed and morphed into another person, and I like the person I am today, and I don't feel that anything's taken from me. In fact, through so much education and also through so much um, counseling, alternative and traditional, I feel that I'm right where I should be.
Right. And that I think is such a hopeful message, right? To know that yes, it could take a very long time. And also there is always the potential that you can be right where you should be,
Mhm.
that you can grow into that, grow into the person that you love to be. I think that's such a hopeful message. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned before some like, gaps in your memory and how you have dissociation and everything else. And I know that's a survival mechanism that sexual abuse survivors often incorporate into their lives, right? Like you just I'm gonna shut it off and put it in that box and not look at it anymore. How Eh, so you've talked about, how opening those boxes were so terrible. But do you feel like opening those boxes, despite the fact that it was terrible, do you think that the ultimate outcome, like, how do you feel the ultimate outcome was? Does that make, does my question
Absolutely.
make sense?
It does. So, I've never really been asked that before, and I'm glad you're asking this question because yes, it was difficult to dig so deep in there emotionally. However, now that I'm in the thick of this, and this is actually something I do for a living now, is being an advocate for trauma survivors, being an advocate for sexual abuse survivors. I recognize so the statistic is 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 4 boys. And
Yeah,
I mean, that is a staggering number right
it
there.
is
And that's here in,
25%.
yes. And if you think about, it's only the reported ones, which brings that number even higher. And I never reported because I was silent in my process. So those are the brave ones who thought, I'm going to rock this boat. I'm going to, burn the house down. I'm going to report. I'm going
Right.
to do something about this.
Yeah.
So
And
that,
I would say most people don't.
no, I don't believe so. I believe that there's so much fear, so much shame, so much embarrassment, so much
Mhm.
entanglement in the family, and especially if you're a child. And if your voice has been stifled, and I felt that mine, that was the one thing I felt that had been taken away. I did not know how to express myself. I did not feel and in any remote way did I feel empowered until I started doing more of this work. So, in this process where I recognized, okay, it's time to stand up, and when I started listening to other people and it's not about the thank you from others or I'm so glad you shared this. It's more creating awareness and the need to know that we have to know more about this. We need to find more open spaces like this podcast where you allow a space so that we could talk about taboo subjects. And I think that's shifting now in society. I think
Mhm.
we recognize that it just doesn't, you know, it doesn't happen just in Hollywood. It really happens to our neighbors, to our
Right.
sisters, to our brothers, to our aunts and uncles, to everybody around us. And I think that is the part where I am so excited to talk to others and help and facilitate any aspect of that healing because we all are looking for improvement and self-improvement and in better
Huge.
how do we find empowerment? How do we become better people in society? But how do we most love out of everything, how do we love ourselves? Because I think it's always a challenge to find love for ourselves. And in this process, just even finding self-love for anybody who listens
Mhm.
about trauma, because it's not specifically about sexual abuse or it's we all go through traumatic events. And
Sure.
some of those, it's like, how do you find love for yourself afterwards, after so much grief, so much pain? And I think that is really kind of uniting ourselves with other people through our grief process.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as you said earlier, I think the storytelling is so very important because it allows us to gain information from others, but also like not feel so alone. Because I would imagine through your experience, because you were forced to not speak about it, right? That
Mhm.
you felt very isolated, like you couldn't form real relationships. Because what if somebody found out your secret?
Right. That's true. I know I did pick the people around me very carefully.
Hmm.
And I always appreciated their confidence in keeping my story to themselves, and not sharing my story because that was a really big issue. Like, this is my story. And if I really wanted my story shared, I would probably take out an ad in the newspaper and share my story. But that was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to have the privacy and the feedback of a one-on-one. And it
Right. You wanted a friend to listen to you. You didn't want someone who was going to share your stuff.
Mhm, and
And I
be
would
some
imagine with something that big that it would be very hard to trust people.
yeah, I think we're human and it's often, did you hear so and so, they said this and blah 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 blah. And I don't think we really mean it in a malicious way. It's just sort of like, or I heard, but
Right.
however you want to put that, it's still sharing sometimes somebody else's story or it's gossip or whatever it may be. But this is when it comes down to something that's really heartfelt and something that carries different levels of shame and grief. That is really a private, when someone comes up to you, that is something to be really respected. And especially if somebody says, don't share, this is so painful.
Right.
So, yeah. Mm,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, part of what I have noticed is that as we continue to share stories, on this podcast and with your book and all of that, people start to become a little more comfortable also sharing their stories. It opens up the opportunities for other people to talk, which I think does ultimately lead to healing, even if it is painful to do it.
Mhm. I 100% agree with you. I think that is the biggest step is just sharing, and I think sometimes listening to other people's story, then you kinda go, "Ooh, maybe it's okay. Maybe I can say this," and I
Right.
think that is the first step. I kind of look at I've been divorced. I kind of feel like, I relate this to when you recognize that your marriage is really toxic and it's not going very well and you're going on through the years, you're always afraid to take that step where you and call it and go, okay, this is the end of my marriage. This is not going to happen. It's like
I know
leading,
that story.
it's leading up to that stage. And then when you take that stage and you jump and you get your divorce and you look back and kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then you go through all the grief and the trauma from processing all that. This is
Right?
very similar because it's still grief, it's still pain.
Yeah.
And this is still a process where you could kind of go, okay, that was the old me. Maybe I'm going to make some changes and this is how I'm going to heal because you don't want to bring that on into your next relationship or into this next new segment of your life. So I
Right.
look at it very similar to when I went through my divorce. I thought, oh, this, it felt almost identical. Like once I was able to take that jump or
Mhm.
once I was able to express and tell others, then I was able to recreate and free myself and empower myself like, okay, I'm not going to do these decisions. I'm not going to be that person anymore. I want to have a healthier outlet.
Right. Right. So, talk to me a little bit, Cindy, about how your experience has impacted how you parent.
Mm, I have to say, I've got, well, excuse me, I have 4 children. So we're a blended family. And so I hate the statistics, but it's 72%, 72% failure in having a healthy and ongoing relationship the second time around. And I remember thinking like, "Oh Lord, like, okay, am I strong enough? Can I do this even with my do I have a strong enough skills to in my relationship with this man that I wanna have, and can I take on the responsibility of sharing my past with my children and how I hope my parenting like, I hope I have had learned enough through therapy that I could take on, um, just their grief, what's going on with them, and not have it, I'm gonna say leak my past leak out into my parenting with them. So I have to say with parenting in general, it does kind of come natural to me, but I have to say there are times that I was overly fearful for my children, just being in the world where I was, maybe being a little bit of a helicopter mom,
Yeah.
and they didn't understand, my boundaries were so strict on things that they could do. They just thought, you know, gosh, she's such a hard ass. Just I was
Right.
sort of like, "What is wrong with you, mom?" And a lot of questioning, and I recognize it came out of my own fear when they would say, "What is wrong with you, mom?" And I thought, "Oh, okay, like, let's get this in check. Like, this is my personal fear," and really think about I think they're gonna be okay, but I thought most of it was education, and I think that's what I did, and they thought these books that I would give them on I did a interview with my daughters, and I would give them these books on private touching, secret touching, and they hate it, and they thought that was the worst Valentine's gift, whereas I thought it was the best Valentine's gift,
Right.
and they were
I
they were
love it.
smart. Um, but it's so yeah, it did bleed out on that, and I did have their grandfather later on in life as adults in their life, and he would come to the door. I probably said this thousands of times to him. I would say, "Hi, Dad. Okay, so you made your choices. And I'm making my choices. So again, just to the table, to the bathroom, and no going in any other rooms." And then he would he would rub his head, or he would act in denial, like, "Why do you say this?" Or, "Oh, you poor you for saying these things." But that was my boundary, and I had said it every time at the door when I saw him. uh,
Mhm.
from from the time actually from the time I had, they were infants all the way up until they were in their 30s, and it's just something that I did regularly, and, maybe that was overkill, and it wasn't that I was trying to torture him, it was I'm protecting myself and my family
Your family, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, I think there are many people who would not have allowed him
in the household.
anywhere near your family.
I do so my sister was very much like that. She goes, "Okay, they're I'm not going to share this with my family, with the
Right.
kids." And, so she had later on in life, she just kind of was like, "I can't deal with this. I don't wanna do this." And I was like, "Well, then you have to be you. You have to recognize that this is how you feel, and when he passes, that this was the right thing, that you don't have any regrets, because you don't wanna have any regrets." But I knew it was too much work for me to pretend that it didn't happen.
Right.
It was, too much work to, ignore him since I was his power of attorney, and my dad didn't really feel that he did anything wrong, so it was really hard for me to deal with somebody who was completely in denial, and of what he did and wouldn't own up to what he did. And then also it brought in other dynamics of the family where I hadn't shared with other family members, like aunts and uncles, his aunts and uncles on my mom's side, where I just thought, okay, this is opening Pandora's box, and I am just going to do what I've always done, and that's just have him occasionally over for holidays, some dinners where, I'm not very involved in his life. So that's how I managed it, and I did what worked for me. And when
Right.
he up here, it was what worked for me. I also shared this analogy, and everybody's different.
Sure.
If 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 I saw a dog on the side of the road and it was injured, I would pick up that dog, and even if it bit me, and I would take it to a shelter.
Right.
And so I'm doing what works for me. I don't think I could drive past that. Even though the dog may bite me or may bite me over and over again, as long as I feel that I'm protected and I gave that animal services. And I know I don't mean to be referring to my father as in this
No,
scenario.
but I understand the analogy there. Like what I'm hearing you say is that you treated him with compassion despite the fact that he hurt you so badly.
Oh,
And your sister didn't necessarily have that same compassion, but you're different people.
right.
And you had different experiences no matter what, like no matter how similar they were, right? Um, but like you would an injured dog, you treated your father with the compassion that he did not treat you with, um, which, is a remarkable thing. I think, like, I think we all want to be treated with compassion. And perhaps if your father had been treated with compassion earlier in his life, he wouldn't have gotten to where he was, right?
I haven't, I haven't really thought about that. Yeah, possibly. Yes, I agree with you. Possibly. I don't know. It's
Right.
hard.
I mean, and
uh,
we won't ever know for sure, right? Because he is gone now.
He
But
is gone. But I did what worked for me, and I think
right.
that's where I wanna emphasize. I think when you have a dynamic in your family, you have to do what works for you. It may not work
Yes.
for your, other siblings, but then also being mindful what works for your husband or your partner, or what works for your children. What is consent? Like, when you if one of the kids would have said, "Oh, I this is absolutely something I am not comfortable with," then, but they always took my lead, and they felt comfortable, and sometimes they would say, "Oh, grandpa's really weird." And I would go, "Yes, he is weird," and trust that instinct. He
Yeah.
is weird.
Yeah.
Trust that.
Yeah. Don't be by yourself with him.
No, and that was never going to happen.
That was never gonna happen. Right,
Never going to
exactly.
happen.
So, I think it sounds to me like you absolutely did what was right for you and what and with the safety of your family and yourself in mind, and yet still showed him some compassion as he was getting older and toward the end of his life.
Mhm. And I wanna be selfish in this. This was just it was truly about me. It wasn't about, "Oh, geez, I'm feeling guilty, like I need to give my father love." It wasn't that. It was just sort of like, "Oh, geez, this works for me, and this is all about me, and I'm doing what works out of convenience for
Yeah.
myself." Mhm.
But you could have also made, here I am playing devil's advocate,
I
right?
love it, love it.
You could have also said, what works for me is to deny the power of attorney and not help him at all. You could have abandoned him, and you did not choose to do that.
No, I think let's just say I think he knows who I am, and I think he always knew I would come through or be that person.
Mhm.
Mhm. And that was one of
Yeah,
the surprising things at the end. He said, "I can't believe it. I've isolated everybody, and look who's by my side." And that was what he first said, and that was when I recognized that was his it was a door opening into I said, "Well, then let's talk about this." And that was how we started talking. And I write that in the book about,
right.
well, let's talk about this. Like, why did you do this? And um, but the main part I like to, if we could, is touching on those intuitive healing tools that I feel that we all often have these innate we have an innate ability to heal ourselves, and
Uh-huh.
sometimes they're not fancy tools. They don't involve money. They're things that we intuitively can do for ourselves, and we have to think about what works for us.
Right.
So, say, for example, some people say, "Oh, forgiveness," and other people go, "Absolutely not. I would never go towards forgiveness."
Mm.
Then, if that is the process for you, then that is your journey, and that's okay, and you should have no shame about that. Then,
Right.
then work on something. You could also write a letter. A lot of times, forgiveness is a process of forgiving yourself of part of that scenario. And meditation, I know some people go, "Oh my gosh, I love meditation." Other people go, "No way." But that's a very inexpensive way, and meditation can be in different formats. And since I do have a special needs son, he gets stressed um, often, and so we're always trying
Mhm.
to work of how do we meditate in at work, and how do you do this to find a center back to yourself.
Mhm.
And then with dissociation, when something's triggering or something's really igniting you, where you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to run, or I feel numb, or I want to throw up in this conversation, I would often put ice in my mouth, or if I had a drink, ice, or I'd open up a window to try to stay present, or if I was sitting down, I'd rub my hands on the texture of my pants or my sweater or whatever it may be. Maybe
Mhm.
taking off my shoes and rubbing my toes into the earth to ground me a little bit more so that you don't dissociate, so that you can stay present. And
Right.
when you use breathing, inhaling, those are very inexpensive ways. This is all free, and we can innately
Absolutely.
figure out and decipher what we can do to stay present or to get through stress or stressful times. And that is a section in my book that I talk about, like visionary boards. I know people think that's just for children. You don't have to you don't have to take out and create these elaborate boards. It could be when I was a teenager, I would rip out just pictures or words and I would just have them and put them in a little in a book, and I just put them in one portion of the book, and when I wanted to picture what it looked like to feel love, I would take out those little ripped words that I had or a picture or a heart or whatever that vision. A lot of times it was a mountain for me or some kind of form of nature, and I would look at that, bring light a candle often, and bring in that scent of what that beauty would look like, feel like, so feel it in my senses, meditate on and think about myself, and that's what love looks like for me. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I think you have to recognize what works for me and then trying them over and over again to
Right.
see what works for me. Mantras were an amazing, amazing tool for me. I made up my own. Put a sticky note on the bathroom mirror and I would, every time I brush my teeth, every time I wash my hands, or use the facilities, I would say those mantras. And there were, yeah, 20 times. But if you think about how often you go to your bathroom, or if you could be mindful, maybe stick a rubber band on your finger. And when you look at your finger, going, oh, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself for all my flaws, I love my flaws. Whatever
Right.
your mantra may be, if you're saying that, there is a shift in there. And um, if that works for you, I think it could be a powerful tool as well.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
so many things we can do. I think that it just, as long as it resonates with you. And if they don't, it might be 2 days, 4 years, and then alternate. Inspirational
Yeah.
quotes, one of the things that just love when I see something beautiful because love words. I look at that and think about that, and then also use it in a visionary way too.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's interesting because there have been things like some of the things that you've mentioned that have helped me in seasons, right? So like for a good solid year, I meditated almost daily. Now I'm not in a meditation season right now, but like I think that's another thing to think about too, is that if something doesn't work for you right now, it's worth the try in 6 months or so to see if maybe it works for you now, right?
Right?
Because
Right?
again, these are free tools and you might as well try them. And sometimes you just have to be ready to try them,
Mhm.
and sometimes you're not ready, and that's okay too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think, therapy I remember going to a therapist sometimes for years, or I would only go to a therapist twice, and I thought, "Oh, okay, I got all that I need from this therapist. I'm going to quit and then find somebody else who I could resonate with in a different level." But that might be it too. You just might
Right.
need a quick little checkup, or it might not. When I was younger, it was, talking to an elderly person because they were present and they were still. And they would
Uh-huh.
flush out all the ideas, or a stranger, sometimes listening to a talking to a stranger, they don't really have any skin in your problem. They're skin in it. So they just kind of just shoot it out really quickly and they go, well, have you ever thought about this? And blah, 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 blah. You never see that person again. And
Right.
so I, I used to use that as a tool too. Just like maybe I'll ask a stranger, because you just don't know. Not all the time. Sometimes friends or family that cater to our emotional needs, and they might not be as objective as we would.
Right. Absolutely. Sometimes it is very often a good idea to get an outside perspective. And that is, as you said, can certainly be done through therapy and can be done through conversations with people you wouldn't necessarily typically have a conversation with.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, Cindy, tell us about your work now. Um, I know people experience all kinds of trauma and lock it away, and you've worked really hard to uncover it and your trauma, and also to do that to help other people. So, tell us what you're doing now.
So currently, I'm working on translating my book into Spanish. I am half, well, I'm half Mexican, and so I feel a connection there. But as I was, it's not, it's more than a connection. I recognize there's also an underserved population that
Hmm.
everything is pretty much in English. That's the chosen format that a lot of our information comes in. And so I thought, well, it would be I'm going to have everything translated. And it's not through AI. It's really, I have a person who is translating the sensitive subject matter, um, and where they could see it in video format or written down below. And so the book will be now in Spanish, and that's coming out in October. And I'm
Oh, that's awesome!
so excited, yes, and so I have a lot of
Congratulations.
thank you. I have a lot of followers, from South America, and then also Africa and France, um, and I think that's because, there's not a lot of resources out there,
Right.
and it's not as openly discussed in that area.
Yeah.
Those areas, I should say, those
Yeah.
areas, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got that, and I've been doing my advocacy work. This is really, I do it I don't get paid for this. I do it out of, passion, out of love, in hopes to help others, and, I'm really driven about it. I feel like this is a calling for me. I love, talking to other people, talking to people like you, speaking, presenting, because I feel there is such a need for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, have you on their podcast or have you as a speaker or just have a conversation with you, where can they reach you?
Best place to reach me is at www.cindytalks.com. And that brings you to my blog, but I have a place there where you could reach out, and I'm always reach out. I always respond. So please feel free and open. I also have um, a blog there where I have different information. I have great videos. I interview my children often, and we have open conversations about how to navigate through um, trauma and sexual abuse within families, and how I have it in stages where when they were younger, what they thought about it, if they felt any shame, or what recommendations do they have for other children. So I it's
Oh, very cool. That's
oh,
an
thank you.
awesome resource.
So it's not just about their story. It's really, how do we do this as the dynamics within a family, and how do you break out of these cycles, and how do we break out of these generational cycles and stop these cycles with ourselves.
Right.
And so that's a lot of what I have on my website. I have every podcast on there too, just like this episode.
Yeah.
And you could also find me on Amazon. The book is on Amazon, but I'm really honestly on every single place that you could sell a book. I believe that's where my book is at.
Okay. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I think your message will resonate with a lot of people, and keep doing your great work.
Thank you, Carrie. And you too. My goodness, you have such a powerful podcast. I was I know I shared this with you earlier, but I was listening to them and what a great diverse you it's almost like you uniquely handpicked these people and they're so diverse and so insightful. I think I was up to 1 o'clock in the morning last night listening to your podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Seriously, thank you. I have been very, very blessed to come in contact with the people that I have gotten to come in contact with in this journey. So I appreciate everyone and you know, thank you and hopefully we will talk again soon.
Looking forward to it. All right. Have a lovely day.
You too.